First of all, a big thank you to the organizers for organizing this amazing event. Basically, we are here today to focus on real estate development and more so on sustainability. My talk today will be focusing on embedding sustainability into the supply chain of future real estate development. So before I go into the deep, I want you to keep this in your mind. Before the first brick is laid, the future of a building is already decided. So sustainability is not an afterthought. It's not when you're finishing the design or finishing the construction, you say, oh, I need to apply sustainability. It's before even that. You think of where the building material is coming from. You think of where the contractors are bringing their material. The supply chain in general is where it begins before it actually begins. Saudi Arabia's momentum of opportunities are immense, and we saw and we heard about a lot of discussions today. And we know this, in fact, about the previous projects that in the lineup with the Saudi Vision 2030. 278 plus mega projects shaping new cities in the kingdom, more than $187 billion worth of sustainability investment, net zero targets by 2060, and the supply chain is the invisible foundation. That's the background of all of what we're doing. It's basically, it's no longer an option, it's the backbone of Saudi Arabia's sustainable future. I'm not going to discuss this. We are here. We are well aware of what supply chain is. But as an example, you have, for example, you have the cement from Yanbu factories, steel from Jeddah suppliers, tiles imported from Italy, labor mobilized from all over the world. All of those are bricks that be laid for every project to reach its sustainability and lifespan. What comes with that is something we call the embodied carbon. So that's the hidden evil behind really getting sustainability projects applied. So, for example, to mine, refine, transport, and install materials, cement production alone accounts for about 8% of global CO2 emissions. So many factors come into play when you think of the embodied carbon, and it's the footprint of building materials before the operation. So before you're even putting material into the building, there's already carbon emission for your building. So you need to consider that early on. So choosing the right material with lower emission is the start of your green supply chain, prioritizing local certified suppliers, and we have abundance of it in the market, designing out waste from construction, so there's a lot of demolition construction. In fact, every building that's going to finish their construction, there's approximately between 15 to 30% of demolition waste even before the building is occupied. So the supply chain matters now because the world is changing fast, and we are here discussing supply chain real estate development. Basically, investors are increasingly aware of sustainability and its ESG aligned with their portfolios. Saudi Arabia's vision is very clear when it comes to supply chain and its sustainability objectives. And we need to think of sustainability as embedded, as I said before, not bolted. You know, it's not an after fact. It's not something that you just beautify the building with. So the carbon footprint of real estate is important to think of from the get-go of the inception of the project. So real estate is globally responsible of almost around 40% of the total emissions. And within that, the supply chain accounts for 70 to 80% of the carbon emissions. So if you tackle the supply chain, you're going to help in reducing your overall carbon emission for the overall project. So focusing on that, the operational carbon, we use energy construction when we miss the bigger hidden impact. People think of carbon emission, I'm going to reduce my energy, the HVAC system, but it's not there. The bulk of it is in the supply chain before even the building is built. In Saudi Arabia, the supply chain reality is basically it's growing rapidly, as we see, and we are part of this ever-changing atmosphere. So the heavy reliance on imported high-carbon material like steel and cement, for example, local production is improving. We have local manufacturing. We have international companies coming and opening their businesses here. Transport over long distances adds to the carbon emissions, so the government is really advancing in opening up manufacturers here that have their supply chain local, so we're going to reduce costs, carbon emission, global warming, and all of that. So as an example, the embodied carbon hotspots for Saudi projects, we're going to look at three main materials: cement, steel, and glass. In cement, basically, it's going to be used in the foundations, slabs, precast elements, and whatnot. So we're looking at 800 to 900 kilogram of CO2 equivalents per ton. Steel accounts for 1,800 to 2,000 kilogram CO2 equivalent per ton. Glass, 500 to 700. So only those three elements, you can basically identify in the supply chain how much the CO2 emissions will be and how to reduce that in overall. And the selection of the cement, the selection of the glass and the steel is very important. So where you source the material is also another aspect. The energy used in raw material extraction. If you have the identification of where the raw material is going to be extracted, you can actually start communicating and collecting information and data. We heard a lot about data information technology. We can use IoT services to help us identify and track that supply chain custodian of those supply chain, as example. The Saudi vision has sustainability embedded within its core. So the three pillars of the Saudi vision is basically utilizing the sustainability and the SDGs in general. So it's no longer an option. Now projects, especially governmental projects, and we are seeing also the projects for the Saudi Vision 2030 are applying it as a mandatory to reach at least a certain level of Mustadam, and which is the local rating system, and LEED as well. So there's an enforcement with the Saudi building codes. One of them is code 601 and 1001. And it's the adoption also of the circular carbon economy. As an example, you have NEOM, Red Sea Global, Roshan. Most of the giga projects are actually disclosing what are the project classification and strategies they are using and utilizing. So NEOM, for example, the net zero construction strategy, modular design. We have Red Sea 100% is going to be renewable and off-grid, and Roshan focus on low carbon, affordable green housing. I'm going to try, I have a very short time so I'm going to try to skip. So Red Sea Global, as an example, 70% of construction materials sourced locally. They prioritize certified suppliers, strict embodied carbon caps for contractors. NEOM, the blockchain-based supply verification, which ensures ESG compliance, digital twin modeling, and local supplier capacity building to meet green procurement practices and standards. Over here, I'm showing traditional versus future-ready supply chain. So traditional, basically, it's price-driven, imported heavy materials. So the main thing is being important, no emission tracking whatsoever, and short-term thinking. But being future-ready for green supply chain, a sustainable supply chain, basically, you're looking at it being sustainability-driven, local, low-carbon sourcing, fully supply chain traceability, and life cycle cost optimization. So the future of supply chain vision, basically looking at carbon, conscious design and procurement, transport reporting and embodied carbon, ESG scoring for vendors, and integration with national sustainability platforms like the Mustadam rating system, like the Circular Economy Center. Basically, this can be done through three main steps: green procurement of building material, the material selection, and supplier engagement. Step one, basically, green procurement policies require material that have certification like environmental product declarations, ISO 14001, and prioritize low carbon material and demand the ESG reporting from suppliers. And the second step, the material selection strategy, basically use low carbon alternatives. And as I said, there's abundance of them in the market, such as green concrete, recycled steel, designed for modularity and adaptability, like the example we're seeing in Roshan, and also the example used in NEOM. Favor material listed under Saudi Eco-Label program, especially those that are labeled with SASO. And early supplier engagement, basically begin with ESG screening of pre-qualification stages, providing training, and build long-term partnership with sustainable suppliers. Greening the supply chain, we're looking at basically the design phase, the procurement phase, the construction stage, and the handover. So the embodied sustainability needs to be adopted at every phase. Again, I reiterate and refocus on this. It's not just something you add on later on. It's something that needs to be embedded and weaved into the whole process from the inception phase down to the handover of the projects. Key KPIs to think of and consider when you think of green supply chain. Embodied carbon intensity. Basically, this is the target of kilogram CO2 equivalent per ton or per square meter. Percentage of materials with certifications such as EPDs or green certification. Percentages of local content used. And supply chain emissions reductions versus the baseline. These are the basic KPIs that every project needs to put into place to basically say that they are utilizing sustainable supply chain concepts. Of course, the utilization of IoT and digital supplies, supply chain BIM 6D, which uses carbon tracking dimensions, IoT sensors on site, blockchain-enabled supply chain verification. So utilizing those basically innovation strategies in the Saudi vision, for example, SABIC's low carbon material roadmap, green steel plants, and modular offsite construction initiatives under the Saudi Vision 2030. It's also important to monitor what you're doing throughout the whole supply chain. So ESG monitoring framework for Saudi projects as an example, basically starts with internal audits, you have third-party verification, public reporting of supply chain carbon performance, and this is going to be mandatory later on when it comes to reaching the 2060 target of carbon neutrality for the whole country. A simple example, a few examples here. Global case studies. Saganka is one of the world's largest construction companies, and it launched its Embodied Carbon First program. The objective basically is to treat embodied carbon with the same seriousness as cost and schedule from project initiation. So immediately when we say real estate development, the first thing that comes to your mind is cost. But this company has put, again, one of the most important pillars is the embodied carbon first. What has been taken, basically, the embodied carbon was mandatory assessment for every major project. The early stage of material selection based on life cycle carbon assessment and impact, and it's not just for the price. Integration of carbon targets into project contracts and procurement decisions, and also the use of digital carbon modeling such as BIM-based 6D during design, procurement, and construction phases. So the impact of this is large and huge. They have seen up to 30% reduction in embodied carbon basically by utilizing those steps. And it became recognized as a leader under the various ESG and green building certifications. Another example, Land Lease, one of the biggest real estate developers in the world. They have been recognized basically that Scope 3 emissions in carbon is a major impact in the supply chain and real estate development. So they have actively measured, managed, and reduced their Scope 3 emissions over the whole supply chain layers. What they have taken is they have developed an inventory strategy for mapping carbon hotspots across supplier and subcontractors. They required supplier carbon disclosure and procurement processes and provided training and capacity building for their practices. And they have engaged directly with material producers such as cement and steel to pilot low carbon initiatives and innovations. So the impact, basically, they have tackled one of the most difficult scopes in carbon emissions, Scope 3, and it became competitive advantage, helping them basically reduce their overall carbon and their ESG investment. And they have demonstrated the early supplier collaboration leads to better carbon outcomes for long-term partnerships. So Saudi Arabia has an advantage of leapfrogging and advancing better than other countries or other companies that have yet to reach its goals. But with our leadership and our initiatives, it's unlike any other country. Basically, we can skip outdated high carbon practices. We are going to use embedded technologies and IoT systems and mandate embodied carbon cap and ESG standards for suppliers to basically supply sustainable real estate. Action plan. What to take from this? Adopt green procurement policies, integrate LCA, life cycle assessment, early in the project design, build supplier ESG engagement programs, and monitor, report, and continuously improve. There's a famous quote, you can't manage what you don't measure. So monitoring is basically very important to actually measure your impact, make sure you're within the line of the sustainability strategies. So Saudi cities now, basically, I'm going to give you this important fact. 3 major cities, Riyadh, Jeddah, and Dammam, account for almost 70% of the population of Saudi Arabia. So those 3 major cities, if we think just of the supply chain in the real estate development, for those 3 major cities, we're going to define generations tomorrow. So what we're doing today is not just for us. We're building for our future generation. So the supply chain choices you make today will impact your children and their children in the coming future. So choose to lead, choose to build greener blueprints. And this is a choice before it becomes mandatory. So when it becomes mandatory, it's no longer kind of an action that we can take from ourselves. I hope I'm not taking too much time. Thank you very much. And from the organizer, if you have any questions.